On this blessed day, February 11th, we gather not by accident but by invitation, an invitation whispered by faith and carried on the breath of hope. We come with hearts that know the world can be uncertain, yet spirits that believe in a God who is constant. Tonight we lift our eyes beyond fear and lift our voices beyond doubt, calling on divine protection not only for ourselves, but for the families whose names are etched into our prayers. This is a moment to wrap our loved ones in faith, to place our homes under heaven's covering, and to remember that God's protection is not merely a shield against harm, it is a promise of presence. As we pray, we stand on sacred ground, trusting that the same God who watched over generations past is still watching, still covering, still holding us now. February 11th does not arrive by chance, it steps into our lives carrying intention in its hands. A set day in prayer is a declaration that time itself can be consecrated, that an ordinary square on the calendar can be transformed into holy ground. When we choose a day and call it sacred, we tell the world, and more importantly, we tell our own spirits, that faith is not something we stumble into when trouble knocks. Faith is something we prepare, something we schedule, something we show up for with open hearts and steady hands. There is power in naming a day. Power in saying, this is when I will pause, this is when I will listen, this is when I will speak to God, not in haste, not in panic, but in purpose. February 11th becomes more than a date. It becomes a meeting place between heaven and earth. It reminds us that prayer does not have to wait for crisis to be valid. Prayer can be proactive, like planting seeds before the rain ever falls, trusting that the soil of faith knows what to do when the storm comes. A set day gathers our scattered thoughts and brings them home. In a world that pulls us in 100 directions, where hours slip through our fingers like water, choosing one day anchors us. It says, I will not let life rush me past my God. On February 11th, we resist the tyranny of busyness and reclaim our time as an offering. We slow our steps, quiet our minds, and remember that protection begins with attention. Attention to God's voice, God's promises, and God's unfailing presence. There is also a quiet courage and consistency. When we return to prayer on a marked day, year after year or moment after moment, we build a rhythm that steadies the soul. We are telling fear that it does not own the calendar. We are telling uncertainty that it does not set our schedule. Instead, faith takes its place at the head of the table, reminding us that God is not only present in emergencies, but powerful in preparation. February 11th becomes a reminder that divine protection is not a last resort, it is a daily inheritance. A set day in prayer connects us to those who came before us. Long before our names were spoken, people marked time with sacred pauses, days of fasting, days of remembrance, days of calling on God's mercy and strength. When we pray on February 11th, we join that long, unbroken line of believers who understood that survival is not accidental. We are standing on the shoulders of ancestors who prayed through chains and storms, through silence and song, believing that God heard them even when the world did not. Their faith whispers to us now, telling us that setting aside a day is an act of remembrance as much as it is an act of hope. This day also teaches us discipline, the gentle but firm kind that shapes character. Prayer on a set day is not about perfection, it is about presence. Some days we come strong, voices lifted, faith blazing. Other days we arrive tired, carrying questions instead of answers. February 11th makes room for all of that. It says, come as you are, but come. And in coming we learn that protection begins not with flawless words, but with faithful return. God honors the heart that shows up, even when the knees are shaking. When we dedicate a day to prayer for divine protection and family safety, we make a statement about priorities. We are saying that our families are worth covering before the danger appears. We are saying that love is proactive, not reactive. February 11th becomes a day when we speak names out loud, when we imagine our homes wrapped in grace, when we ask God to stand guard at doors we cannot always watch ourselves. This is not superstition, this is trust made visible through intention. A set day also unites us with others, even when we pray alone. Somewhere someone else is bowing their head on this same day, whispering similar hopes, lifting similar fears. February 11th becomes a thread that weaves individual prayers into a larger tapestry of faith. We may never meet each other, but we meet God together. And there is strength in that unseen community, strength in knowing that protection is being asked for not just in one voice but in many. There is something deeply human about needing reminders. We forget to rest, forget to hope, forget to pray until life reminds us with a sharp edge. A set day gently interrupts that forgetting. It taps us on the shoulder and says, "Remember who you belong to." February 11th calls us back to ourselves, back to our values, back to the truth that we are not navigating this world alone. God's covering does not depend on our memory, but our peace often does. On this day, prayer becomes a rehearsal for trust. We practice releasing control, laying down worry, and opening our hands instead of clenching them. We practice believing that protection is not only about what is kept away, but about what is held together. Families are strengthened, hearts are steadied, and minds are renewed when we intentionally place them under God's care. February 11th becomes a training ground for faith that will be needed on ordinary Tuesdays and unexpected Fridays alike. A set day in prayer also gives language to hope. It allows us to speak boldly, not because we are fearless, but because we are faithful. On February 11th, we dare to say that goodness can prevail, that safety is possible, that God's covering is sufficient. We dare to believe that prayer changes not only circumstances, but the people who pray. It reshapes our vision, softens our hearts, and reminds us that we are participants in divine love, not passive observers. And perhaps most importantly, a set day teaches us that God honors our intention. When we mark February 11th as sacred, we are not limiting God to a date. We are aligning ourselves with God's willingness to meet us wherever we are. The day becomes a doorway, and prayer becomes the step through it. We walk in carrying our fears, our families, our futures, and we lay them gently before a God who has been waiting all along. So February 11th stands as a quiet witness. It watches us choose faith over forgetfulness, intention over indifference, prayer over panic. It reminds us that protection begins long before danger shows its face, and that love is strong enough to plan ahead. On this day, we do not rush past God. We sit, we speak, we listen. And in that holy pause, we discover that divine covering is not only promised, it is present, patient, and profoundly personal. Divine protection is not a distant promise stored away for emergencies. It is a living presence that moves with us, breath by breath, step by step. It is the quiet assurance that even when we do not see the road clearly, we are not walking it alone. God's covering does not announce itself with thunder every morning, yet it is as constant as the sunrise and as faithful as the night returning to its place. It surrounds us not because we are flawless, but because we are loved. There is a gentle misunderstanding that protection only matters when danger is loud. But divine protection is most powerful in its constancy. It is there in the ordinary moments, when a door closes safely behind us, when a voice inside whispers wait, when a turn we did not plan becomes a blessing we could not imagine. God's covering works quietly, like roots growing underground, unseen yet holding everything upright. We may never know all the harm we were spared, and perhaps that is part of the mercy. God's protection is not the absence of struggle. It is the presence of strength. It does not promise that storms will never come, but it promises that storms will not have the final word. When the winds rise and the ground feels unsure, divine covering becomes the shelter that keeps the soul intact even when the body is tired. It is the reminder that we can bend without breaking, cry without losing hope, and endure without losing ourselves. There is something deeply tender about the idea of covering. To cover is to care, to guard, to claim responsibility for what is beneath. God's protection is not casual. It is intentional, like a parent pulling a blanket higher around a sleeping child. God's covering adjusts itself to our needs. It warms us when we are cold with fear and steadies us when uncertainty shakes our rest. Even when we are unaware, even when we doubt, the covering remains. Divine protection also teaches us trust. It asks us to believe that what we cannot control does not control us. In a world that constantly reminds us of risk and vulnerability, God's covering offers a counter-truth, that safety is not only physical, it is spiritual. Our bodies may face danger, but our souls are held. Our plans may falter, but our purpose is guarded. Protection becomes not a wall that shuts life out, but a presence that walks life through with us. God's covering reaches beyond the individual and stretches itself across generations. It remembers children before they know how to ask for prayer, and elders whose strength now lives more in memory than muscle. Divine protection is not limited by age, distance, or circumstance. It crosses rooms, cities, borders, and time zones. When we pray for covering, we are asking God to stand watch over lives we cannot always reach with our hands. There is humility in accepting divine protection. It requires admitting that we are not self-sufficient, that wisdom and vigilance alone are not enough. God's covering invites us to release the illusion of total control and rest in divine care. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the strength of knowing when to place our trust higher than our fear, and our faith deeper than our doubt. Divine protection also reshapes how we see danger. Instead of being paralyzed by what might happen, we are anchored by who walks with us. Fear loses some of its power when we remember that God is not surprised by our circumstances. Nothing arrives in our lives without first passing through divine awareness. That does not mean every hardship is chosen for us, but it does mean we are never abandoned within it. There are moments when protection feels invisible. We pray, yet the road remains rough. We believe, yet the night still feels long. In those moments, God's covering is doing its quietest work, protecting our hope, keeping our hearts from hardening, guarding our spirits from despair. Divine protection is sometimes less about changing the situation and more about preserving the person within it. God's ever-present covering also carries a moral weight. When we know we are protected, we are called to live with courage and compassion. Protection is not meant to make us careless or cruel. It is meant to make us confident enough to love boldly. When we feel safe in God's care, we are freer to forgive, freer to serve, freer to stand up for what is right. Divine covering does not shrink our responsibility, it strengthens our resolve. There is beauty in the way God's protection adapts. What covers us in one season may look different in another. Sometimes it is provision, sometimes it is prevention, sometimes it is redirection. A closed door can be as protective as an open one. A delay can be as merciful as a quick answer. God's covering is wise enough to know the difference, even when we do not. Divine protection also reminds us that we are seen. To be covered is to be noticed, to be valued. God does not protect what God does not cherish. Each life under divine covering is a life deemed worthy of care. That truth alone has the power to heal wounds left by neglect, rejection, and loss. It tells us that our lives matter beyond productivity, beyond success, beyond approval. When we speak of God's ever-present covering, we speak of a protection that does not expire. It does not clock out at night or falter under pressure. It holds steady when our faith wavers and our strength runs thin. Even when we wander, even when we forget to pray, the covering remains. God's protection is faithful beyond our faithfulness. And so when we pray for divine protection, we are not asking God to suddenly become attentive. We are aligning ourselves with the truth that has always existed. We are opening our awareness to a covering that has been there all along. We are choosing to rest in the assurance that no matter where we go, no matter what we face, we are surrounded by a love that guards, guides, and keeps. God's ever-present covering does not remove us from the world. It places us firmly within it, held by grace. It allows us to wake each day with courage instead of dread, with hope instead of panic. It reminds us that while life may be uncertain, God is not, and in that certainty we find the strength to walk forward, covered, protected, and profoundly loved. Family safety is not merely a concern we carry in our pockets like loose change. It is a sacred responsibility we hold close to the heart. It is the quiet vow we make the moment we love someone beyond ourselves. To pray for family safety is to acknowledge that love creates duty, and duty invites reverence. It is to say without apology that the people entrusted to us are worth more than worry, worth more than habit, worth the holy attention of prayer. There is something ancient and tender in the act of covering family in prayer. Long before walls were built and laws were written, people lifted their voices to heaven, asking that their children be spared, that their elders be strengthened, that their homes be kept. This instinct did not come from fear alone, it came from love informed by wisdom. Love knows its limits. Love understands that even the strongest hands cannot block every danger, and so it reaches upward, asking for help that does not tire. Family safety begins in the recognition that life is shared. What touches one touches all. A child's laughter can brighten an entire household, and a single worry can sit heavy at every table. When we pray for safety, we are praying for wholeness, for the unseen threads that bind hearts together to remain unbroken. We are asking God to protect not only bodies, but relationships, peace, and the fragile joy that lives between people who care for one another. This responsibility is sacred because it requires us to look beyond ourselves. It calls us to intercede for those who cannot always speak for themselves. Children do not know all the dangers they face, yet they walk boldly into the world trusting that someone is watching. Elders may not always voice their vulnerabilities, yet they carry histories that deserve protection and honor. To pray for family safety is to stand in that gap, to become a bridge between vulnerability and divine care. There is also humility woven into this responsibility. It teaches us that love does not equal control. We can guide, teach, and warn, but we cannot script every outcome. Prayer becomes the place where we release our illusions of mastery and admit our need for God. In lifting our families into divine hands, we confess that protection deeper than our own is required. This confession is not weakness, it is wisdom refined by love. Family safety is not only about shielding from harm, it is about nurturing environments where souls can breathe. A safe family is one where kindness is practiced, where words do not wound carelessly, where forgiveness is not rationed. When we pray for safety, we are asking God to guard our tongues as much as our doors, to protect hearts from bitterness as fiercely as bodies from danger. Safety is as emotional and spiritual as it is physical. This sacred responsibility also challenges us to be consistent. It is easy to pray fervently in moments of crisis, but family safety asks for daily faithfulness. It asks us to whisper prayers in the morning rush, to pause before sleep, to remember names even when distance grows. Love does not clock out, and neither does this responsibility. Prayer becomes the steady rhythm that undergirds our care, reminding us that protection is a practice, not a reaction. There is power in speaking family members' names before God. Names carry history, personality, and promise. When we pray them aloud, we affirm their worth and individuality. We tell heaven, "This life matters to me." And in doing so, we often find our own hearts softened, our patience renewed, our commitment strengthened. Prayer shapes the one who prays as much as it shields the one being prayed for. Family safety as a sacred responsibility also extends beyond bloodlines. Families are formed by choice as well as birth, friends who become kin, neighbors who become support, communities bound by shared care. To pray for family safety is to acknowledge that love defines family more than lineage. God's covering is wide enough to include all those we hold close, all those whose well-being rests in our concern. This responsibility teaches us foresight. We pray not only for today's journey, but for tomorrows we cannot see. We ask God to go ahead of our loved ones, to stand guard at crossroads, to whisper wisdom when decisions loom. Prayer becomes a way of loving across time, sending protection forward into moments yet unarrived. It is an act of hope that believes the future is worth caring for now. Family safety also invites gratitude. Each safe return, each ordinary day without harm, becomes a quiet miracle when seen through the eyes of prayer. Gratitude deepens our awareness of God's presence, turning routine into testimony. We begin to see protection not only in dramatic rescues, but in uneventful days that pass without sorrow. Thankfulness becomes a companion to responsibility, reminding us that care received is care worth honoring. There are seasons when this responsibility feels heavy, when danger feels close, when answers seem delayed, when worry steals sleep. In those moments, prayer becomes both burden and balm. We lay our fears down, sometimes repeatedly, trusting that God can carry what we cannot. Family safety is sacred because it asks us to keep loving even when love aches, to keep believing even when certainty wavers. This responsibility also shapes our actions. Prayer does not absolve us of care, it sharpens it. When we pray for safety, we become more attentive, more compassionate, more willing to act wisely. Divine partnership does not replace human effort, it elevates it. We lock doors, teach boundaries, offer guidance, and still we pray, understanding that sacred responsibility lives at the intersection of faith and action. Family safety reminds us that love is protective by nature. To love is to watch, to hope, to intervene when necessary. Prayer gives that instinct a voice and a direction. It turns instinct into intention, concern into communion. We are no longer guarding alone, we are guarding with God. In carrying this responsibility, we learn something profound about ourselves. We learn that we are capable of devotion that stretches beyond convenience. We learn that our hearts can hold fierce love without being consumed by fear. We learn that asking for help does not diminish our strength. It reveals our humanity. And so family safety stands as a sacred responsibility, not because danger is constant, but because love is. It is the daily choice to care deeply, to pray faithfully, to trust boldly. It is the acknowledgement that our families are gifts and gifts deserve protection. When we place them under God's care, we are not surrendering responsibility, we are fulfilling it with reverence, humility, and hope that does not easily let go. Faith and fear often arrive together, like uninvited guests competing for the same seat at the table of the heart. Fear speaks first, loud and urgent, rehearsing every possible disaster, magnifying every shadow until it feels larger than life itself. Faith, however, speaks last, and speaks softly, but what it says carries weight. Faith reminds us that uncertainty is not new, and neither is God. Long before we learned the language of worry, faith had already learned the language of endurance. An uncertain world has always been our companion. History tells us this truth plainly. Generations before us faced wars, sickness, displacement, and loss. Yet they rose each morning believing that life was still worth living, and hope was still worth holding. Faith over fear is not denial of danger, it is defiance of despair. It is the decision to stand upright even when the ground beneath us trembles, to look forward even when the path ahead is blurred. Fear thrives on the unknown. It feeds on unanswered questions and thrives in silence. Faith, on the other hand, does not require all the answers. Faith requires trust. Trust that even when the picture is incomplete, the painter knows what they are doing. Choosing faith does not mean we stop feeling afraid. It means fear no longer gets to be in charge. Faith takes fear by the hand and says, "You may walk with me, but you will not lead." In an uncertain world, fear urges us to shrink. It tells us to protect ourselves by withdrawing, to love less so we can lose less, to hope cautiously or not at all. Faith responds with a braver instruction. Faith tells us to keep loving, to keep building, to keep believing that goodness is still possible. Faith understands that safety is not found in isolation but in connection with God, with others, with purpose. Faith over fear also changes how we interpret our circumstances. Fear sees obstacles as endings. Faith sees them as passages. Fear asks, what if everything goes wrong? Faith asks, what if something good is still unfolding? This shift does not make us naive. It makes us resilient. It allows us to move through uncertainty without being consumed by it, to acknowledge risk without surrendering to it. There is a quiet strength in faith that fear cannot imitate. Fear exhausts us, keeping our muscles tense and our minds racing. Faith steadies us. It allows us to rest even when answers are incomplete. This rest is not laziness, it is trust embodied. It is the kind of rest that says, I have done what I can and now I will place the rest in God's hands. Choosing faith over fear is an act of daily courage. It is not a one-time declaration, but a repeated decision. Some days we choose faith with confidence, standing tall and hopeful. Other days we choose it with trembling hands and whispered prayers. Both choices count. Faith does not demand perfection. It honors persistence. Every time we choose to believe instead of panic, to pray instead of despair, we strengthen a muscle that will carry us through future storms. In an uncertain world, fear often disguises itself as wisdom. It tells us we are being realistic, cautious, prepared. Faith does not reject preparation, but it refuses to let preparation become paralysis. Faith prepares and then proceeds. It plans and then trusts. It acknowledges risk while believing that God's protection is greater than any threat we can imagine. Faith over fear also transforms how we speak. Fear-filled language is heavy with what-ifs and never-agains. Faith-filled language makes room for still, yet, and even now. Even now, God is present. Even now, healing is possible. Even now, joy can surprise us. Words matter because they shape the world we inhabit internally. Faith teaches us to speak life even when circumstances argue otherwise. This choice has generational impact. When we live by faith instead of fear, we model courage for those watching us. Children learn how to respond to uncertainty by observing our response. Communities take cues from our posture. Faith lived openly becomes a testimony louder than any sermon. It tells others that fear is not the final authority and uncertainty is not the end of the story. Faith does not promise ease, it promises companionship. God does not stand at a distance, shouting encouragement while we struggle alone. God walks with us through the unknown, matching our pace, steadying our steps. Faith reminds us that we are not facing uncertainty by ourselves. We are accompanied by a presence that does not falter or forget. There are moments when fear feels justified, when news is grim, when losses pile up, when prayers seem unanswered. In those moments, faith does not scold us for being afraid. Faith sits with us, allowing tears, acknowledging pain, and still whispering hope. Faith understands that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to be ruled by it. Faith over fear also invites surrender. Not surrender to circumstances, but surrender to God. It is the release of outcomes we cannot control and the acceptance of grace we did not earn. This surrender lightens the soul. It frees us from the exhausting task of trying to predict every future and manage every risk. Faith says you were never meant to carry all of this alone. In an uncertain world, fear tells us to focus on survival. Faith invites us to live fully. Survival keeps us breathing. Faith keeps us becoming. It encourages us to dream, to create, to serve, even when conditions are less than ideal. Faith believes that purpose does not pause for uncertainty. It unfolds within it. Faith over fear does not make us careless. It makes us courageous. It sharpens our discernment without dulling our compassion. It allows us to face reality honestly while believing in a reality greater than what we see. Faith gives us the strength to say, I do not know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds me. And so, in this uncertain world, faith stands as a quiet rebellion against despair. It is the refusal to let fear dictate our future. It is the choice to trust God's character even when we question God's timing. Faith lifts our eyes beyond the chaos and anchors our hearts in something unshakable. When we choose faith over fear, we are not pretending the darkness is gone, we are choosing to light a candle anyway. And in that small, brave act, we discover that uncertainty does not have the power to extinguish hope. Faith, once chosen, once practiced, once lived, becomes a guiding light, steady, resilient, and strong enough to lead us forward one courageous step at a time. Prayer is often misunderstood as a quiet retreat from the world, a soft-spoken pause in the noise of life. Yet prayer in its truest form is an act of courage. It is hope spoken out loud. It is the refusal to accept despair as the final verdict. When we pray, we are not escaping reality. We are engaging it with faith sharpened by love and strengthened by belief in something greater than ourselves. Hope begins where prayer begins. It rises not from certainty, but from trust. We pray because we believe that what is broken can be mended, that what is threatened can be guarded, that what feels heavy can be lifted. Prayer gives hope a language when words fail us elsewhere. It allows us to say, I believe in a future I cannot yet see. In a world that often teaches us to expect disappointment, prayer teaches us to expect possibility. Prayer is powerful because it gathers what is scattered. It brings wandering thoughts home and restless hearts to rest. When we pray, we align our inner world with divine purpose. This alignment is not passive. It is transformative. It shifts our focus from chaos to calling, from fear to faith. Even before circumstances change, the one who prays is changed, and that change carries power. There is unity woven into the fabric of prayer. Even when prayed in solitude, prayer connects us to others. Somewhere, someone else is whispering a similar request, lifting a similar burden, hoping for a similar miracle. Prayer collapses distance. It binds people who may never meet into a shared act of trust. When many hearts turn toward God, unity is born, not from uniformity, but from shared dependence. Prayer reminds us that we belong to something larger than ourselves. It dissolves the illusion of isolation. We realize that our struggles are not unique, and our hopes are not solitary. This realization does not diminish our pain, it dignifies it. It tells us that our tears are understood, our questions are heard, and our faith, however fragile, is welcomed. As an act of hope, prayer dares to imagine better. It imagines safety where there is threat, peace where there is tension, healing where there is hurt. Prayer is the birthplace of vision. Before change manifests in the world, it is often conceived in prayer. Every movement toward justice, compassion, and reconciliation has been preceded by someone believing, praying, that things did not have to remain as they were. Prayer also humbles us. It places us in a posture of openness rather than control. In praying, we acknowledge our limitations and invite divine strength. This humility is not self-erasure. It is self-awareness. It allows us to say, I cannot do this alone, but I do not have to. That recognition alone can restore hope, where pride and exhaustion have depleted it. Unity through prayer does not erase difference. It sanctifies it. People come to prayer carrying different stories, languages, wounds, and dreams. Prayer does not require sameness, it requires sincerity. When diverse voices lift their hopes toward God, unity emerges not from agreement on everything but from shared reverence. Prayer teaches us that we can stand together without standing identical. Prayer as hope also sustains us over time. Hope that relies on circumstances is fragile. Hope rooted in prayer endures. When answers are delayed and outcomes uncertain, prayer keeps hope breathing. It becomes the steady flame that does not flicker with every gust of disappointment. Through prayer, hope learns patience, and patience deepens faith. Prayer unites generations. Elders pray with the wisdom of experience, children with the innocence of trust. Their prayers meet in the same sacred space, equally heard, equally valued. This intergenerational unity reminds us that faith is a living inheritance, passed not through perfection but through practice. Prayer becomes the bridge between what has been and what is still becoming. In moments of collective crisis, prayer reveals its communal power. When communities pray together, fear loosens its grip. People remember their shared humanity. Prayer becomes a language that transcends politics, culture, and circumstance. It reminds us that beneath our differences we all long for safety, dignity, and peace. In this way, prayer becomes an act of reconciliation. Prayer also teaches us to listen. Hope is not only spoken, it is received. In the stillness of prayer, we learn to hear guidance, to sense conviction, to receive comfort. This listening shapes our actions. Unity formed in prayer often moves outward into service, advocacy, and compassion. Prayer does not end on our knees, it walks into the world through our hands. As a powerful act, prayer resists despair without denying pain. It allows us to grieve honestly while believing fiercely. Prayer makes room for lament and praise to exist side by side. This honesty strengthens unity because it welcomes the full human experience. We do not have to pretend to be strong to pray. We simply have to be sincere. Prayer also redefines victory. Sometimes the miracle is not the outcome we wanted, but the peace that carries us through. Sometimes unity is not found in agreement, but in shared endurance. Prayer teaches us that hope is not always loud or immediate. It is often quiet, persistent, and deeply rooted. When we pray together, we practice solidarity. We carry each other's burdens, lifting weight that would be unbearable alone. This shared hope builds resilience. It reminds us that we are stronger together than apart, and that faith grows when it is shared. Prayer as a powerful act of hope and unity does not promise a life free of struggle. It promises a life anchored in meaning. It reminds us that even when the world feels fractured, we are held together by divine love. Each prayer becomes a thread, and together those threads weave a fabric strong enough to cover families, communities, and generations. In the end, prayer stands as a quiet declaration we still believe. We believe in goodness beyond headlines, in love beyond fear, and unity beyond division. We believe that hope is worth speaking, worth sharing, worth sustaining. And in that belief, voiced again and again through prayer, we find ourselves not alone but connected, held by faith, bound by hope, and united in the grace that carries us forward.